Well, hello everybody, and you're all very welcome along to week 2 of our 3-step process to maximizing your sales and profits program. So this is week 2 of 5, and we're going to cover this week is cost plus. Now, cost plus is all about making sure that all the costs it takes to run your business are reflected in your selling prices. And I've worked with hundreds of businesses, and one of the most common things I see is that when I compare the costs of a business and I look at their selling price, there's often a mismatch. And what's happening is that they're not recovering all their costs, so their selling price isn't set at a level high enough to recover all their costs. So it's very, very common, and this may be an issue for you, and if it is, we need to look at it and we need to address it and correct it. And that's the main thing I'm going to be covering in tonight's webinar. So let's crack on. Now, I've actually only completed the webinar and all the recording and notes earlier on today. So I have been working on them for a few weeks, but I've only finalized them earlier today. And I must say I'm very, very excited with what I've produced for this session, week 2, and for the other sessions as well. And I think it's going to cover all the things that a business owner needs to look at in their selling prices. And if you go through the steps I'm going to cover with you and you apply it in your business, I've no doubt that you're going to end up with a more accurate product costing that's going to lead to higher prices, and it means better profits for you. I've no doubt in my mind. We're going to cover all the areas that need to be covered. So just as I said, this is week 2 of the 5-week program. Hopefully you've seen week 1 already. I'm going to do a quick recap on it anyway shortly before we get into the detail of cost plus. But you can see there what we're going to cover. In this week I'm going to cover the cost plus. Week 3 is going to be the competitor analysis and USP. Now week 4 is an introduction to 80/20, which is critical to premium pricing and charging higher prices, because when we tweak our prices, if you think about your own business, if you start tweaking your prices upwards, it means that you also need to be finding and attracting a certain type of client who appreciates the value and will pay higher prices. So it goes very much hand in hand with selling price is 80/20 and getting your marketing right. So I often say it's like a 3-legged stool. You're pricing 80/20 and your marketing, and if you work on them all together, it can have a massive impact on your business in terms of your sales and profits. So that's week 4, and week 5 is value plus pricing, which is all about looking at what you do, looking at your customers and saying, what value do you deliver? How is your customer better off when you finish dealing with them? And is that value reflected in your prices? Quite often it's not. A lot of my consulting clients now, when we get through the cost plus and the competitor analysis, we're onto this step 3 in value plus. And there's a huge amount can be done there in terms of the different ways you can look at what you do for your customers, how they're better off. So that's an area, there's a vast area, and there's huge opportunities there if you can tap into that value and reflect it in your prices. So each of the 3 steps can help look at your pricing. They can be increased at some of the steps. It can be, your prices could be increased at all of the 3 steps, which is great for you, or it could be increased at some of them. So it depends on your type of business, where you're at. But the main thing I'm going to cover this evening is the cost plus. So what you get over the next 4 weeks is you get the webinar, you get a workbook, an MP3 recording. Now you'll also get email support from me for 3 months, and you get 2 30-minute phone consultations, and I'll talk about those again later on. Now just one thing about the recording. This week, because there's so many numbers involved and because we're going to be using workbooks and spreadsheets, I won't have a recording for this week, but you will have access to the webinar, so you can come back to this webinar anytime you want a refresher. So you will have access to the information. It's just with the recording, it doesn't really make sense to do the recording when there's so many numbers involved, and I'm going to be referring you to the workbook and the spreadsheets, so you really need to have them in front of you to get value from this. So there won't be an MP3 recording for this week, but there will be for the other weeks. So what I'm going to cover in tonight's webinar is the overview of what we've done last week. I'm going to show you the workbook and the spreadsheet. We're going to look at your annual running costs. What are your annual running costs? We're going to look at your selling price method. I'm going to give you examples, and then in the second part of the webinar, I'm going to have you looking at your costs and your selling price and actually putting figures into those templates. So I suppose what I'm going to be using is the tools and techniques and processes that I use with my consulting clients. So the whole idea of this course and the next 4 weeks is that the tools and techniques and templates I use are the same ones I use with my consulting clients. And you know, I've been doing a review with some of them over the last couple of weeks, and you know, I've just got some fabulous results with clients over the last year using these techniques in terms of helping them grow their sales and profits. And there's no reason why these techniques won't work for you as well, and that's what I've built into this course. So I must say I'm very excited about going through this content with you in the next 4 weeks. And again, just to emphasize this point, regardless of what level of sales your business is at, I think there's definite quantifiable benefits you can get from the course. Now, just take a scenario where, let's just say your sales were 50,000. Now, I would confidently expect to get at least an increase of 10% in your selling prices over the course of these 4 weeks. Now, that would mean 10% of 50,000 obviously is 5,000 euros extra sales. But because it's a selling price increase, this is pure profit. Your costs aren't going to change. So a 5% increase in your sales next year would actually mean a 5,000 increase in profits. That goes straight to your bottom line. So I'm quite confident you will get that. If for whatever reason you don't, I'll give you a money back guarantee. But I want everybody coming on this program to get that kind of value at a minimum. I mean, some of the results I've got for clients over the last years, some of them have doubled their sales. There's examples of people getting 2- and 3-fold increases. I'm not saying that will happen with you, but there are examples of that. But a minimum of 10% is what I would hope and expect to get with everybody. I say a minimum 10% increase in your selling prices, your sales, your profits. Okay. Again, just a quick recap. I'm conscious you may not all have seen week 1 webinar. This is just a little bit about me. I've been an accountant for 27 years. I've been working with small, medium-sized businesses for the last 23 years as a consultant and trainer. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of businesses, and the main areas I specialize in are selling price and 80-20. And as I said earlier, these two topics are very closely connected and they tie in very well together, and I'm going to cover 80-20 in week 4 and pricing in the other 4 weeks. So just to recap again, the 3-step process is cost plus. As I said, that's making sure your costs are reflected in your prices. Competitor analysis and USP is where you can look at your business, you look at your competitors. I have different matrices we can use to rank you against your competitors, and then you can see how you score, and then you can see where your selling price is compared to your competitors. And on that basis, there may be an adjustment upwards. For example, if you have very high scoring and yet your rate that's not reflected in your selling price, then you have an opportunity to increase your selling price so it's more in line with your competitors. Value plus pricing, premium pricing, is all about knowing how your customer is better off. It's like stepping into your customer's shoes and understanding what do they get when you're finished delivering your product or service. How are they better off? You helping them grow their sales, reduce costs, be more productive, taking away some pain or issue or problem they have, giving them something they need in their business. So it's a totally different mindset. Most business people don't think this way. But I'd like by the end of this program is that you're starting to think this way. I'm going to cover that really in weeks 4 and 5. If you can get into this mindset, it can just transform your business, because it's like putting on a new pair of glasses. You will see your business and your pricing totally different. And I can assure you it'll be different from most people in business. Most people look at their business on a cost plus basis. Okay, so let's get into the meat of step 1, cost plus. As I said, it's all about ensuring that your costs are included in your selling price. Now, just a brief history on how selling prices are set. And if you think about your own business, think back to when you started in business. How did you set your selling prices? Now, it was probably one of these 4 different methods you used. Cost plus is where you'd have sat down yourself, or maybe, accountant, bookkeeper, or somebody else familiar with figures. You might have sat down and estimated what the running costs of your business were going to be. So that's a cost plus, is where you're trying to estimate the cost and reflect it in your selling price. A very common approach people take starting off is competitor comparison. I gave the example of Norma in the first webinar, where she was a web designer and she looked at her competition and saw that they were charging €70 and she decided to go in at €40. So her competition were charging 70 and Norma was thinking, oh, I can charge that, they're in business longer than me, I can only charge 40. And an awful lot of businesses fall into that trap, that fear of not charging enough, and it can cause all kinds of problems. Now the third approach, which is not very common, but I do come across it every so often, is a premium position. So a bit similar to, going back to the example of the web designer Norma, if Norma had a different mindset and a premium mindset, she could look at her competition saying, they're charging 70, so I'm going to charge 100 or 120. And now to do this, you have to deliver real value. You have to be better than your competition. You have to be different. I would think you have to quantify the benefit of what you do, but it is possible to do it. It's not very common because I suppose it's a mindset, it's a confidence that a lot of people don't have starting in business. Now the fourth method that people use, and I do see this, is just gut. So they don't do any of the numbers or competitor comparison or whatever. It's just pure gut. Now obviously this is not recommended because it's there's no real basis for it, and if you get your pricing right doing this, it's sheer luck. Not to be recommended. They're the main approaches people take, and I'm sure when you started in business, or even the last time you set your prices, you probably took something approach similar to those four. Okay, now what do we need to do cost plus? We need two pieces of information. We need your annual running costs and we need your selling price method, which is how you've set your prices previously, because you must have taken some approach, whether it was the cost plus or the competitor analysis or whatever. You have prices and you arrived at them using some method. So the annual running costs, so where are you going to get these from? Again, this is covered in the workbook. You should have the workbook in front of you and hopefully the spreadsheet as well. You could have access to those. You should have those from me through email or access on the members web membership site. Apologies. So your annual running costs, the most likely sources of these are if you use an accountant to prepare your accounts and do your tax return, then you need to get a copy of the accounts, your most recent set of accounts. And if you go in there and go to the profit and loss, it should have a list of all your costs from your last financial year, whenever that was. Now another source may be internally. For example, if you have an accounting software package you use to, when you're raising your invoices, when you're paying your suppliers and so on. Some people have an accounts software package like Sage or QuickBooks, Big Red Book. There's lots of them out there. There's quite a lot of cloud ones now as well. Xero, I know, is making inroads in the UK and Ireland and Australia. So you may have an accounts package like Sage, or you may use spreadsheets. You may have a manual system where you're tracking your costs and your sales and so on. Now, if you don't have either of those options, or if you're not using an accountant and you don't have any internal system for tracking your accounts and doing your admin, then another option is bank statements. Now, it's not ideal, but I've often gone into businesses and where they don't have any information, I just get hold of their bank statements and I'll go through them. And because what you'll find in business, that a lot of costs are similar month to month. So if you've got like phones, insurance, wages, suppliers, so on, a lot of these costs are very similar month to month. So you go through the bank statements and you will get a pretty good feel for the costs of a business. Now the fourth one I put down there is cash businesses, and these I suppose are becoming rarer, but you have people out there who don't really use bank accounts too much and have cash businesses. But if they're operating legitimately, I suppose there should still be a paper trail. There should be lodging money. There should be paperwork available to track their costs and their sales. So they're the main sources of your running costs. Now, what I'm going to do is turn to the workbook you have in front of you. The first couple of pages I'm going to cover what I've covered already in terms of your selling price method and so on, where you can get your financial information. So what we're going to do here is look at a couple of examples of a set of accounts and a selling price method. So those two pieces of information you need. We're going to look at a few examples You're going to look at one for a service business, you're going to look at one for a product business, and then I have templates in the workbook, and I also have spreadsheets I'm going to take you through. And the whole idea is that I'll want you getting your costs and starting to calculate a new revised selling price, and then we're going to compare that to your existing prices. Okay, so on page 3 of your workbook, you'll see an example of a service business. Now, the top half of page 3, you'll see the most recent set of accounts for Mary. Mary is a web designer. Now, her sales were 30,000 and her total cost of running her business 37,200. Now, Mary actually made a loss of 7,200. Now, so the top part is her accounts, and this is what I'll want you to get as well. The second bit is our pricing method, which again I'll want you to get. So this is an example. So if you have a service business, your accounts or your pricing method may look similar to Mary's. So the bottom half of page 3, you can see Mary's pricing method. And what you can see there is her own wage is 25,000, her overheads are 7,000, total is 32,000. So that's her sales target. So that's what Mary wants to do in a year. How does she arrive at that? How does she recover it? She's going to work out an hourly rate. Some people have a daily rate or an hourly rate, very similar thing. So the bottom part of page 3, you can see Mary's sales target is 32,000, which comes from her pricing method just above. I'm going to divide that by average number of weeks she will work every year, which we put down as 45, and I'm going to divide that by average number of billable hours she will have every week, which we put down as 20. So what you do here is, if you have a calculator handy, it's probably no harm to work this out. You say 32,000 is our sales target. We're going to divide that by average number of weeks she'll work, 45, and we're going to divide it by 20, the average number of billable hours she'll have in a week. So you get an hourly rate there of 35.55, which you could round up to 36. Might be no harm sometimes even to round it up another bit, 38 or 40, but certainly round it up to 36. Okay, now if we turn to the top of page 4, just to explain how I've arrived at those figures. The average number of weeks is 45. Now, as we all know, okay, there's 52 weeks in the year. So why are we picking 45? The reason we're picking 45 is to allow for things like Mary taking some holidays for herself. Now, I know as business owners, maybe we don't always get the full allocation of holidays, but let's assume Mary is going to take some holidays for herself as she goes through the year, and also for quieter months. Like most businesses have seasonal times, they have quiet times and busy times. I know, for example, mine is August and December are probably my two quietest times. So Mary is taking 45 weeks to allow for holidays and also quieter months, seasonal months. Now, average number of hours, billable hours in a week, we've taken 20. Now again, we know business owners, as a business owner, a lot of us do work long hours, 40, 50, 60 hours a week. Some of these have been the evening time, weekends, but if you take it as 9 to 5 as being the typical working week, where Mary can be with clients or doing work, we'll take that as a maximum of say 40 hours she could be working. We've taken 20. Why is this? Because not all of those 40 hours are billable. Mary will have travel time, she'll have administration to do, some marketing of her business, banking and so on. As a business owner, I'm sure you're familiar with this. So we've been conservative and probably realistic and said we're going to take 20 hours a week as being billable. Okay, so that's how we arrived at a rate of 35.55. Now if you look back at page 3 again, you'll notice there's a bit of an issue here with Mary's pricing, because if you look at the top half of the page and you see figure A, total costs, Mary's total cost of 37,200, and if you look at figure B below it, her total sales target is 32,000. So Mary is pricing to recover 32,000 and yet her total costs are 37,200. So there's a gap there of 5,200. Now, so Mary has a few options. She can try and work longer hours or more weeks. Now let's assume that she can't actually do that. Now if that's the case and Mary wants to recover her full cost, which is 37,200, she's going to have to increase her rates. So if you look at the bottom part, bottom half of page 4, I'm calculating Mary's revised pricing. Now her wages are 25,000 as they were earlier on, but her overheads, which previously were 7,000 in page 3, I've increased that to 12,200, which come from her accounts. Okay, so I've taken the 12,200 from our accounts. If you look back on page 3, the top part of page 3, Mary's total cost, and just above that, total overheads 12,200. Just to explain overhead figures, what we normally do is Mary's taking a wage of 25,000 and all the other costs associated with running our business, like rent, car expenses, insurance, etc. They're called overheads or fixed costs, so we kind of lump them all together. So on Mary's revised pricing, what we're doing is taking the wage that she wants to pay herself, which is 25,000, and an overhead figure of 12,200. That gives a total of 37,200. Now we go through the same steps we did earlier on. We're going to divide it by 45, being the number of weeks, and 20, the number of hours. Now you can see the hourly rate there we've worked out for Mary is 41.33. So that's taking her revised sales target of 37,200 and dividing it by 45 and dividing it by 20 will give an hourly rate of 41.33. Now you'll have seen from Mary's earlier rate, which is 35.55, that we've actually increased Mary's rate from 35 euros to 41 euros per hour. And in doing that, she's going to make sure that she's able to pay herself a wage and recover all her costs. Now, as I said, the purpose of business is to make a profit. I would see the next phase for Mary, when she's done this initial correction, I would see the next phase being if she starts bumping that up towards 45 or 50, then she's making a nice profit for her business as well. Okay. Let's move on. So we've revised Mary's overheads and pricing so that we've increased her prices to make sure that she's recovering all her costs in her selling price. And as I said earlier on, this is the main purpose of Cost Plus. Now, that was a service business. Now let's look at a product business. I've assumed here John, this guy's making furniture. So on page 5, what you can see is his total costs for the year, and then his pricing method is down in the second part of the page. So you can see that John's most recent set of accounts, his sales are 200,000, his direct labour and material supplier were 120,000. So this is in the top part of page 5. His gross profit is 80,000. Now again, you can see material suppliers. A product business, somebody making a product like furniture, is buying a product to sell it on. A service business obviously doesn't have these costs because they're not buying anything to sell on, they're just selling time. So material suppliers is probably the main difference in costs between a product business and a service business. So in John's case, this is the furniture and the cloth and the other materials he'll be buying in to make his furniture. Okay, so John's gross profit is 80,000. His fixed costs, his overheads are listed underneath. You can see a total, figure B, total fixed cost 76,000. John's net profit is 4,000 euros. Now, underneath, you can see John's pricing method. This job is a sample and is typical of how he prices his jobs. You can see how John prices a job. Materials are 1,000 euros. Direct labour is 50% of materials, is 500. And C, overheads are 60% of materials, 600. Total 2,100. John adds on a 20% profit margin, which is 420 euros, giving a total selling price of 2,520. Now, so these are the two sets of figures, and like I'll be asking you to do as well, I want to compare the costs to the selling price. So how do John's compare? Now, if we look down at the bottom of page 5, or on the slide I've up at the moment, you'll see that there is a difference again in overheads. So if you look at figure B, total fixed costs are 76,000. Figure A is material suppliers, 80,000. And figure C is overheads, 60% of materials. But I'm sure you'll see that if you take figure B, which is 76,000, and divide it by figure A, material suppliers of 80,000, that gives a percentage figure of 95%. So they're almost the same. You can say they're almost the same. The overheads, fixed costs and material supplier costs are almost the same. Yet when you look at figure C, what John is including for overheads, it's 60% of materials. So it's not enough. He should be charging 95%. And again, this is very, very common. Why does it happen? Well, to me, there's two main reasons this will happen. The first one is, let's just say when John was calculating his pricing method originally and he put in 60%, he may not have done it correctly day one, or he may not have done it correctly whenever this price was last updated. It may not have been done correctly, so it may never have been right. And what can also happen as well is, let's just say when John was starting in business, when he last set his price, his overheads were 60% of materials. But what I often find is that a price was set maybe, we'll say maybe 3, 4 or 5 years ago, and hasn't changed. So the price is quite old. And as you know, costs only go one direction. Costs go up. So what's very common as well is that somebody set a price, costs have gone up, and they haven't updated their selling price. And it's quite possible that that's what's happened here with John, is that he set his overheads to be 60% of his material cost when he's working out his price. His costs have gone up, and they're now 95%. So his total fixed costs, his overheads, are now 95% of his material cost, and yet he hasn't reflected that in his selling price. So if you turn to page 6, you'll see that I've revised John's selling price. So what we've done here is the materials and labour are still the same, €1,000, €500. Overheads is now 95% of materials. And if you just turn back to the bottom of page 5, you'll see figure C, overheads 60% of materials, €600. That's now been increased on back to page 6. Figure C, overheads are 95% of materials. So that figure has gone from 600 to 950. The total has increased as well, up to 2450, and the profit is 20% of the total. So our total selling price, which was 2520, has now increased to 2940, and it's brought John's profit back on track. Okay, moving on. We're now going to move on to the workbook section, where we're going to get you looking at your costs. So if we think about what we've done just up to now, we've taken 2 examples, a service business and a product business, and we've compared their accounts and their costing information for a year to their selling price method. Now I'm going to move on to and show you how you can do something similar. We're going to look at your costing information, and then I want you taking that and to come up with a revised selling price, a new selling price, and then compare that to your existing selling prices. So if you turn to your workbook, you have 2 options here. In your workbook from pages 7, 8 and 9, you can take your cost information, put it in page 7, and then on pages 8 and 9 you can work out your selling price method, depending if you're a product business or a service business. Now, second option is to use a spreadsheet, and this is by far the best option. Now, if you're familiar with Excel and spreadsheets, that's great. If not, maybe you can get hold of somebody who can help you with this, because a spreadsheet is by far the best way of doing this. The great thing about a spreadsheet is you can be sure of capturing all the figures. If there's any changes, you can just go and update your spreadsheet. It's brilliant like that. If you have to price things on a regular basis, like most of my consulting clients do, spreadsheet or something similar is the only way to go. You know, sometimes I come across people who don't have a spreadsheet or a method of calculating prices. And what happens is, if a customer asks them for a price, they give out a price off the top of their head. Now, many times that may be correct, but there's other times where it's wrong. And even just last week I was chatting to somebody who gave out a price for a job that was around 200 and it should have been 800. Now, there's nothing wrong with just stopping. If somebody's looking for a price from you, don't ever feel obliged to give them a price there and then. Okay, because if you have to go in and work it out, and if you want to work it out and make sure that you're giving the right price, you can always say to somebody, look, I need to go in and look at it, I'll come back to you within 12 hours, 24 hours, whatever time it takes. But don't ever be pressurized into giving out a price, because I've seen that happen too often, and the danger is the price will be wrong and too low, because it's rarely too high. The price will be too low, and then you're stuck with a job where you're making little or no profit and maybe a loss. So that is to be avoided at all costs. Using a spreadsheet is by far the best way to go when working out your costs and your selling price method. So you have the options. I said on the workbook pages 7, 8, 9, you can put in your cost information on page 7. There's nothing wrong with using this. You can do this absolutely. If you don't have spreadsheets, you're not familiar with them, you can use what's in the workbook and this will work fine. What I'm saying is that it's probably preferable to use spreadsheets. So on pages 7, 8, 9 of your workbook, you can take your cost information and put it into a selling price method and see what price you come up with. What I'm going to do now for a moment is I'm going to switch over to the spreadsheets. Yeah, it's preferable to do them on spreadsheets. You can do them manually in your workbook. We're going to take you to the spreadsheets. If you don't have it open, I'll just give you a few moments to go and open up the cost plus spreadsheet, because it's best if you familiarize yourself with that. And what I want you to do is over the next week or so is just fill in the information, fill in your cost information and calculate your new selling price method. A spreadsheet is absolutely the best way to do it. And yeah, okay, so hopefully you'll have that spreadsheet open in front of you. I'm going to take you through the 4 tabs. So the first one, you can see A is annual cost for a service business, B is selling price method for a service business, C is annual costs for product business, and D selling price method for a product business. So if you're a service business like a web designer, accountant, engineer, all you need to worry about are the first 2 spreadsheets, A and B. If you're a product business like John with his furniture, all you need to worry about is C and D. So I'm going to take you through the first spreadsheet here, A. So if you have a service business, what you want to do is list out all your annual running costs. Like I said earlier, you can get these from your annual accounts. If you use a software program like Sage or bank statements, you can gather together all your costs, and I just have the main ones listed here. Your own wage, probably be one of your bigger ones. Overheads, they're all your other costs are classified as overheads. Sometimes they're called fixed costs. So salaries, rent and rates, insurance, and so on. You can see them there. If you have any other cost categories that aren't listed here, you can go down to the other categories and put them in. So what you should have at the end of this exercise is you're going to have your total annual running costs. There you can see in cell C25, total annual running cost. The 2 main categories will be your own wage and total overheads, all the other costs called total overheads. Now once you gather those together, we're going to go over to tab B, which is the selling price and method for a service. Now the way this is set up, there's steps, so it lists or describes the steps here from row B6 downwards, down here. There's a blank selling price method for you to fill in, and I'm just going to scroll down underneath. There's an example here of Mary, the web designer, which you'd have seen from the workbook earlier on. So selling price method, the way Mary's is calculated is her own wage is here, 25,000. Overheads, all her other costs are 12,200. The formula will work those out automatically. Her total is 37,200. Now divided by average number of weeks that Mary's going to work are 45. Average number of billable hours per week are 20. So we take the 37,200 and divide by 45 weeks and divide by 20 hours, and that gives us an hourly rate of 41.33. Now some people will have a daily rate or half day rate. You can just take the hourly rate and multiply it by the appropriate figure. It'll give you your half day rate or full day rate. So scrolling back up here again, we're going to work out your own selling price method. You can see the description here. It says take the relevant cost information from tab A, which we just looked at, which are your annual costs. Key the information into cells C15 and 16. So C15 is your own wage, and C16 are your overheads, all your other running costs. You put the 2 of those in there, and in cell C17 it'll work out your total automatically. Then just up to the steps again, the description. It says enter the weeks and hours in cells C20 and C21. Down here it cells C20 and C21. Average number of weeks, average number of billable hours. And it says the hourly rate, your selling price, will work out automatically. And then what you want to do then is compare that figure to your current selling price. What I normally find at this stage is that there is a difference, and normally the selling price you've just worked out is often higher than your existing one, for the reasons I outlined earlier on. Maybe when it was last worked out, maybe not everything was included when you worked out your selling price last time, or another very common reason is that costs increase and the selling price method isn't updated. So when you go up to update it and you have higher costs, it's going to bump up your rates, your hourly rates. Okay, so that's for a service business. List all your annual costs, take your total information across to your selling price method and key in the figures, and it'll work out your hourly rate for you. Now, if you have a product business, slightly different in terms of just some extra costs in there that a service business won't have, because a product business is buying something on to sell it on. Like John with his furniture, he's going to be buying in timber and cloth and so on to make the product and sell it on. So he's going to have material supplier costs and direct labour that a service business won't necessarily have. Well, probably shouldn't have anyway. Okay, so again, in tab C, annual cost for a product business, same as we looked at in tab A. You're going to get your cost information from your annual accounts from your accountant, if you have a software program like Sage, Xero, Big Red Book, so on, or from your bank statements. Get all your annual costs and list them out here. The first one here in tab C4 is material suppliers. As I said, this is the material of what the business makes. Direct labour, in the case of John, he's got people in the workshop making the furniture, that's his cost here. Now most of the other costs are similar to what you'd have seen for a service business. We list them as overheads, your own wage, salaries, administration salaries, rent rates, insurance, phones, maintenance, etc., etc. So list all your annual costs here, and then you want to bring them across to tab B, which is your selling price method. Similar steps to what we saw in tab B. It'll outline the steps involved in calculating your selling price method. There's your blank template here to fill it in, and underneath I put down an example of John, the furniture manufacturer, which you've seen in the workbook earlier on. So John's material costs are 1,000, his direct labour is 500, the overheads are 950. You total those up, those three figures total up to 2450. He's putting in a profit margin of 20%, which is 490. So his total and his selling price is 2940. That is one way that a product business can build up their costs. I'm not saying it's the only way, but it's quite a common method that would be used. So back up here. So you have a product business, you've listed all your costs, your annual costs in tab C, and what you want to do is take across the relevant information in here to calculate a new revised selling price. So what you want to do is key information into cells C15, C16 and C17. So those down here are your material costs, your direct labour and your overheads. The formula will work out the total automatically. And then it says enter the profit percentage in cell C20. Your profit may be different from John is adding on 20%. You need to go in here to cell C20 and put in your profit percentage, and it should work it out automatically. And then you'll have a total selling price, and what you want to do is compare this to your current selling price. Okay, so we're coming back over here just to kind of round up what we've covered. You have two choices for working out your costs. You can use the workbook in pages 7 to 9 and do it manually, or you can use the spreadsheets as I've just shown you. And at the end of the exercise, you should have a new selling price. And what's really interesting is where you can go and compare your new revised selling prices to your old ones, because there often is a difference. More often than not, when I do this exercise, if somebody's existing price was say 100, the new price will come in at 110, 120, 130. It's almost always higher, because as I said, maybe it wasn't worked out correctly the first day, and maybe all the costs weren't included, maybe all the costs weren't known the last time we worked it out, or more commonly, costs have gone up in the meantime and they haven't been reflected in the selling prices. So it's really kind of updating it for cost increases. That can often be what comes out of this exercise. So, okay, now the email and phone support. This is why I've built it into the program. If you can go through those spreadsheets and work out your revised selling prices and you're happy with it, that's great. I'm conscious sometimes people have questions or maybe get stuck. This is what the email phone support is there for. So what I'd like you to do in the next week is complete those spreadsheets, email the information to me. I'll be happy to review it for you, go back with any comments or questions, and then we can get on the phone and review it. Because I'm conscious that, let's just say your prices go up 20%. I understand that there's a fear factor in there straight away, because people are afraid that you're going to lose their customers. And this is something I deal with almost on a weekly basis with the clients I'm working with. It's a fear factor, and there are ways of increasing your prices without losing customers. So I can get on the phone with you and we can talk through all this, and I'd love you to work on your figures and send them on to me, and we'll work on getting you revised selling prices, and hopefully that's going to lead on to higher sales and higher profits and more money in your bank account. Okay, so next week we're going to be looking at competitor analysis and USP, and that's why it's so important to really try and complete the cost plus part of this 3-step process in the next week. So please work on that in the days ahead. Email the information to me and I will work. I've time blocked off. I will work with you and we look to complete the cost plus exercise in the next week. Okay, I look forward to getting those emails from you and working on the figures and getting on the phone with you. So talk soon.